Happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm glad y'all like that intro. It's great. One of my favorite TikToks out there. Welcome back. Um, Excited for today. Hopefully, things will work because I was seeing some stuff on Twitter that there was like some JCenter outage earlier today, which meant people had trouble resolving dependencies, and no idea if that's going to impact us or not. I haven't tried yet, so we'll find out. Um, but even if not, I already have a couple cool things I can show off thanks to Matt uh, DMing me right before this started. Um, if it breaks, let's just remove JCenter. So I think actually this app doesn't use it. Well, technically it does, but it shouldn't be. You know what? That can be part of our project today. Um, Let me just go ahead and switch to the coding view real quick. Um, so apparently this does have a reference to JCenter, but I think that all of our dependencies we use shouldn't need it. So I wonder what would happen if I just remove this. Let's find out. That could be our first thing today. Okay, the Gradle sync worked, so let's see if we can run the project. And let me get Visor going as well, so I can share my phone later. Um, and then I'll show y'all a cool thing that I learned from Matt today. Like 5 minutes before the stream started, he asked me how to do something that I didn't know what was possible. Oh, it's already on this screen. Apparently, from IntelliJ, you can open the why is the visor working? You can open the GitHub version of a file, and basically the way you do it is using apparently there is a context menu for it somewhere, or you can just use the Command Shift A pop-up, which is like find by action. So if I'm here in my settings.gradle file, because I decide that's the file that I want to use, I can do Command Shift A. I can start typing GitHub, and I can see open on GitHub. And I just click that, and you didn't see it because it was on my other monitor, but let me pull this over. And there is the file in GitHub. So cool if you ever need a reason to do that. I find that to be super helpful. Uh, no idea. It looks like it might default to like the commit that you're on, but I guess this would be a handy way to like select the branch then and see what's the difference between my version and what's in GitHub. Or it looked like the context menu here had some other options like if I wanted to share or create gist. So does that like create a gist from this file? Oh, it does. That's cool. And I can set like secret and stuff. That's actually really cool. So definitely do Command Shift A, search for GitHub, see what your options are. It sounds like there's some cool stuff in there. The gist one is definitely neat. Um, and is this working now? Almost. Um, just getting everything set up for today. Nice. And our app is running. We don't have an empty state, which was one of the things I wanted to do today. Um, yeah, gist would be good if you had like scratch files for sure. Um, but yeah, empty states are one of the things I wanted to do today. The other one I wanted to do was like input validation. So right now, when if I click that floating action button in the bottom right, I don't know if y'all saw that. Are tabs visible? They're not. I should turn them on. Um, let's do that. I will forget. Show tabs. Okay. Um, but what we do right now is I can submit and it just makes a task. Here it's using an empty string. Um, so I was thinking that we could add some input validation to this screen where we enforce that we do have to put something in here. But then I was also thinking we could be fancy and like enforce that the date we select is like today or in the future. That's another form of input validation. So um, that's what I was thinking about building. Um, if there are any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to do my thing and just dive right into that. And of course, by dive right in, I mean we're going to talk through everything we need to do to make this happen, because there's a few steps all relevant to the app architecture that we have. Um, but let's do that. Let's also make sure we have, I don't know if we have an issue for this. I don't think we do, so I'm going to make one. Um, handle add task input validation. And that's what we're going to do. So don't allow user to submit an empty description. And then scheduled date must be today or in the future. And we'll add that to the task management project, assign that to me. And this is the issue we'll work on. So number 79, which is nice. And y'all know I like to make those part of my branch names. So here we're going to do git checkout branch TOA 79 task input validation. Um, yeah, so let's talk about what we need to make this happen. And I actually think a good way to do this is to reference a screen that we've already built in this app that has input validation. Um, if you've been watching for a while, you've seen the stream where we built the login screen. The login screen you didn't witness because I'm basically hard coding myself past the login screen. Uh, for simplicity, development's sake, but the login screen has like a username and password field, and we have a situation where we require both of those to be required as well. So let's talk about how we built that for the login screen and try to emulate that using our same app architecture and conventions on the add task screen. And there are two things that I want to call out to chat on this. The first one is going to be in login view state. So login view state, this is a sealed class that has all possible configurations for um, the login screen. So there's like the initial state where we have empty credentials. There's active state where we're inputting information. We have the submitting state, submission error completed. But one to call out is this active state, which is the state of the screen as the user is entering information. This has the current credentials, the email and password that the user's adding. But then also notice we have on here, we have these input error messages. These are a UI text class. That is a class we have. That is basically a differentiator between a string text and a string resource. Um, but these are two properties on our active view state for login. So I wanted to point that out because that idea right there is what we're going to mirror in the add task screen. So if I go to add task view state, this one actually has the same thing. It also has an active view state. So we can put the same logic here. We can have a, um, what did we call it over here? We called it input error message. So we can call this description input error message, which will be a UI text. And we'll default to null. There's no error message by default. And then we can also have like a scheduled date input error message. This might sound weird because the scheduled date isn't like a text input, but it's a like custom date picker. But I guess you could still call it like a piece of input, so it could have a possible error message. And then actually going back, we're going to have to do some fun UI work here to actually display an error message because this whole thing is our own custom widget and it doesn't have support for an error message. But the text fields that we've made in the past, they do. Um, but we can get to the UI part in a moment here. Um, what's the other piece of code that we're going to need to manage here? Um, I guess is that, well, the other thing is the domain logic for actually validating this. That was the second part that I wanted to point out before we get too far. Um, and let's look at how we did that in login. The way we did that in login um, is actually, in the past, I've typically done these things inside like my view model class. But we had a conversation about how the view model should strictly be the state management container, and it really shouldn't do any sort of business logic like input validation. So what we do is we have this credentials login use case. Let's go look at what that does first. This is a use case that, given some credentials, returns a login result. And in a login result, we can either have a successful login. Hey Dev, welcome back. Or we could have a failure login with some explanations like invalid credentials, or here I call it empty credentials. Um, so I think we would do a similar thing on the add task use case. We would want some sort of add task result, which will either be success or failure, and then within failure, some explanation of what was wrong. So that's what we would like to get to. But we should actually look at our add task view model and see what it looks like now because I'm not sure we actually okay. Um, we don't quite do it that way. Um, I'm also thinking, as a side note, I think I'm gonna start going to this invoke syntax because while the operator overload is nice, I feel like this is not beginner friendly. And this doesn't look like a function call to a lot of people. So I think I'm going to take an opinionated approach to try to start using this invoke call. Um, that's just my 2 cents. But let's go look at our add task use case and see how we can modify that. So in this case, rather than define a new result class for like an add task result, what I just described, we used a result class that our app already has, which basically just encapsulates success and failure, which was fine at the time, but now it's time for us to uh, consider more cases. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to take this login result class and I'm going to split and move to the right just as a reference. And we're going to use the same sort of convention for a add task result. So let's do that. So here, we're going to make a new class, sealed class, add task result. Okay, let's put some documentation here. So a collection of possible results for an attempt to add a new task. We're going to have our success case, which means nothing went wrong. I could see, again, another refactor we might make in the future is I might have my success case, like, whoops, um, have some properties to it, like what is the new task entity, or maybe the ID of the created task or something. Um, but that can be a refactor for the future, just letting you know something I can see changing. And then let's do uh, a failure. And the reason I make failure a new sealed class is because I might want to differentiate um, what went wrong. So in the other one, we had this unknown error, which is basically saying like anything could go wrong, right? And in practice, again, our use case is decoupled from any real data layer, but it's possible that our use case is making some sort of network request. So I could have like an HTTP error, I could have a server side error. Um, Maybe they're doing some validation. And anyways, like I don't want to go through the weeds of all of those possible cases yet, but by having this custom sealed class here for the possible failure states, um, I'm just covered if I want to handle those things in the future. But then I can put the possible failure scenarios that I am ready to handle. For an example, um, invalid input. Um, and here, this one gets a little tricky in my head. I'm also going to put a note here real quick. Let's see. Uh, I want to put login result for similar documentation. Uh, just a helpful thing that I like to do in my projects is if I know that similar files have um, like related documentation or the notes are similar, I try to create this link. And by doing the full package name, I can command click right on the comment to go there. So that's something that will help people who come across the project. Um, but let's talk about a slight difference between that. So here we had empty credentials where we had like empty email, empty password. And I guess here I didn't want to call it empty input because we've kind of got like two different ideas here. One is a text field, which yes, it could be empty. Um, but one is a date field, which is not really empty, but it could be invalid. So I guess what I would do is maybe I could put booleans here, like empty description as one of the problems. And another one could be um, scheduled date in past as another boolean. And then our UI, happy Wednesday. Um, and then in our UI layer later, um, we can handle those things. So those are the two big things. We've adjusted our view state to conditionally show errors and stuff like that. Um, we've also adjusted, well, not entirely. We need to adjust our our um, use case to return this new thing. So here we're going to return an add task result. Um, this means modifying here as well. Um, here we'll assume, let's do this. For our actual use case implementation, we'll get the result and then we'll say, um, well, we're going to have to modify this further because we're going to have to do input validation, but I don't want to do that yet. And there's a reason I'm skirting the topic, but I want to get this compiling with our new stuff. We can say when the result, so if this is result.success, we'll return add task result.success. Um, if this is result.error, we'll return add task result.failure, and then we'll just return like unknown for now. Um, so yeah, this will be based on the repository result. We map that to a domain level result that our view model can handle. And the next thing is we're going to need to change our view model to be able to do that. And here we can say if this is add task result dot success, this is what our new view state is. If it is add task result dot failure, then we'll do this. Again, this would be for any type of failure. Um, uh, yeah, so why did I skirt the topic around making our use case actually do a thing? Well, the reason is because I think a change like this is a classic um, example for a day we could use test-driven development. So now that we've modified the appropriate files to support what we want, we can go write some tests uh, that we expect to behave a certain way, and then go through our code and actually make sure those tests pass. But we know that they will fail initially. So that's what we're going to go for. We're going to try to do this with a test-driven development approach. Let me know if any of you have questions about what we've added so far. I'm going to go ahead and commit that, um, prepping support for input validation. And then we can go write some tests. So the first thing I'm thinking of doing is let's write a test that when we submit in our view model with invalid data, we should see the error messages come back at our view state. That's what I'm thinking we should do. So let's go over everything we need to do to make that happen. The first thing is we're going to go to our add task view model, and we don't have any tests for this yet. So, well, there's two places we could put the tests actually. We could put tests, yeah, let's do it. Let's start with our view model. And some of you who've seen my testing content before know I'm a huge fan of this idea of test robots to create like an abstraction layer between my tests and the system under test. So if you've never seen that, that's fine. I'll show you what that is. I'll make one for our add task view model right now, and we'll talk through it. So there's two things. Well, there's a few things that go into setting up a test robot. The first thing is I need to consider all of the dependencies that are going to get passed into um, my view model, right? And the first one being like the add task use case, which would be an add task use case. Now, I've shown in the past that we make fakes, like a real fake implementation of these things, uh, which is probably something that I should continue to do. Yes, I should continue to do this for consistency, even though it's not always the best. So let's do this. Let's create a fake add task use case. Um, and the way that I make these fakes is I still use the mock-k library behind the scenes, but I just have this kind of wrapper around it where I can put it as a property inside this class. And so I've prevented exposing mock-k to the unit test itself. And then what we'll do is we'll need one function to mock the results. So we could say mock result for, how does this work? Um, for task. Hi Prince, happy Wednesday. So you can say here's the task that we're mocking the result for, and then the result will be some add task result. And then here what we do is we can say co every mock dot invoke. So every time we invoke our mock with this task, we want to return this result. Returns result. So that's our fake use case. So actually what we'll do in our robot here is we'll do fake add task use case equals fake add task use case. And then the other thing we're going to need is our view model, which I like to make a latent variable, so that I don't create the view model until my robot has done any initialization that it needs to, or I mock any calls. This is helpful in case your view model does something at initialization. You don't want your test robot to like initialize it right away. So then what is our test robot exposed to the classes? Well, it has to give one thing to say, hey, I'm ready, let's build the view model. So here we just create a function called build view model. And then we can say view model equals add task view model. And then the add task use case will be our fake add task use case dot mock. So we've created our view model. We do need a way for our test to also interact with our fake use case. So we basically just make a proxy from the test into the fake that we just talked about. So um, this this method signature right here, we just use the same thing. And then we just pass this through fake add task use case dot mock result for task. We basically just pass that through. And then what else are we going to need to do? Well, for the test in question, because I want to test like, well, let's write them out. We need to expose one function for every public function on our view model. So here we could have like enter description. Um, task description being some string. And then what we would do is we would say view model dot uh, on task description changed with that task description. And same thing here. We can say select date. This will be um, a local date, is I believe what we use. And then we can say view model dot on schedule date changed with the task date. Let's use the same names here. Uh, and then we'll also need to click submit. So here we'll say view model dot on submit button clicked. So the benefit of this test robot is now when we go to actually writing tests, as you'll see, our tests become so much cleaner to write. But the other thing we'll need is we'll need a way to like assert the view state. There's a couple ways we could do this. We could have something that like observes the view state and observes and asserts like that we had a collection of them. What I'm going to do for now for our error test specifically, let's just say like we want to assert the current view state. Um, so we'll have an expected view state, which will be some add task view state. And then we'll get our actual view state. Will be view model dot view state dot value. And then we just say assert that actual view state that is equal to expected view state. And now our test robot has everything we're going to need um, for the test itself. So let's build one. Let's um, throw in the test here. And then let's say anybody taking notes, you won't need to. This will be on YouTube. Exclamation point YouTube if you're not subscribed to the channel. Um, or just like you see at the bottom there, youtube.com/Adam McNeely. Um, okay, so there's actually, I'm curious what you like to do, chat. So I have two different input fields, but they cover the same idea of invalid input. So would you make one test called submit with invalid input, or would you make it two tests? That one is submit with empty description, and one is submit with invalid date. Um, I've seen both. I'm kind of fine with one test as long as the coverage is there, but I could see an argument for keeping tests down to a specific. It would be a unit test, yes. Um, I can see that as a differentiator. Maybe because UI tests, like connected tests, are longer, that you might try to be cheeky and like cover as many conditions in a single test as possible. But because this is going to run really fast, I suppose it could help for reporting to have it split out. Is that what you're thinking, Matt? I'm going to start typing that, but you can veto me. Um, but let's do that. So, all right, so let's split it. So we'll have one test, submit with empty description, and then we'll have another test, submit with um, invalid date. Okay, so what happens when we submit with empty description? Oh, the first thing we're going to need is our test robot. Um, I also think in this test we're going to need our coroutines test rule. Did we make one of those? I think we did. We did, yeah. Um, that sets like our dispatcher or whatever. Um, so what's this going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is mock result for task. Um, so let's create our task to submit. This will be a task. And what do we put in here? Well, the ID can just be testing. Um, Oh, actually, this will be, we might have an interesting scenario here around this ID, and I'll explain what that is in a second. Let's go further. So description will be empty. Scheduled date we'll just do today. Um, so what we want to do, so for the task we're submitting, we want the result to be add task result dot um, failure dot invalid input. Well, let's split this out to be even more clear. So use case result is going to be add task result dot failure dot invalid input. Ah, and then we're going to say empty description true, schedule date and past will be false for this test. And then we also need to put our expected view state, which will be add task view state dot active. We'll say task input. Okay, this will be fun. Description will be path to submit that description. Schedule date. Dang it. Path to submit that scheduled date. And then here we need to say, so description input error message. What do we expect this to be? Well, we can do UI text resource. We need to go make a string resource for this. Let's do that real quick. Let's go to strings.xml and let's put in error empty task description. And let's say, please enter a description. And then we can also put scheduled date. Uh, please select a date today or in the future. So those will be our error messages. So in our expected view state, we're going to expect that the description input error message is resource text for r.string dot error empty description. And then the scheduled date input error message, this will be null. Okay, so now we can finish writing out what our robot's going to do. So mock task for result, or for mock result for task. For that task, we're going to return our use case result. Now that we have our mocking in place, let's build the view model. Let's enter description for what we're submitting. Let's select date for what we're submitting. Let's click submit, and then we're going to assert view state will be expected view state. That all sounds right to me. Um, empty task description. That all sounds right to me. Now, this will probably, this should fail, um, which is to be expected. We're going to have a little bit of a tricky time getting this one to pass. Uh, does anyone have a guess why? It's based on where I paused around this ID. So the thing is, we have this in our mock. We say, when the user tries to submit this task, return this result. And that's very one-to-one. Like, it has to catch this new task as the input parameter. But the thing is, when I create a task inside the view model, um, we generate a random ID. And so my test task and the one that the view model is going to submit are never going to be the same. So even once I update my view model to appropriately handle this UI state, um, we're gonna have to think about that. And there's a couple solutions. Um, we'll talk through them, but let's start with. Um, oh, why did this? Oh, no, because we'll get this exact error. So Make says no answer found for add task use case dot invoke a task with this ID. So one way we can fix it, um, just to show you a quick solution, is if we go into our fake, um, I can use the keyword any here, which says for any task input, return this result. KT is for Kotlin. Um, but so if I use any, I can say for any input, return this result, which is fine in some cases, but arguably there's an argument that people don't like that because if I say I expect input A and not input B, but I use any, then my test will not differentiate. My test could fail even if my input is wrong. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes you want your mock to verify the specific input you get as well. But let's come back to that. Let's use any for now so we can try to get this test to pass. So we can already see it failed the way we expected. We actually got a submission error, um, which is interesting. Oh, I know exactly. Hey, Raphael. I know exactly why this happened. It's because that's how our code is written. So let's go back here. So here, we check if we are add task result dot failure, uh, then we do this, right? So what we need to do is we need to add a check here for the um, invalid input case as well. So let's go back to login view model to see how that class did it, and then we'll just mirror that as well. Um, Okay, I wanted to see this. So they basically do this is check on everything. So let's do the same thing. Let's go into here. Um, where was I? Add task view model. Um, so here we'll say if this is unknown, we do this. Otherwise, credential check in the view. So the credential check is actually going to happen inside of our use case. But what this is doing is, based on the use case result, configure how the view is going to look. So that might make sense when I add this line right here. We call this add task use case, and then based on what the result is, we can say if the result is add task use case, or add task result, sorry, dot failure dot invalid input, now we can modify our view state. So we're going to return an add task view state dot, I guess there's a lot going on here. How did we do this here? Um, we made a private function in the other class. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the same thing here, just for simplicity's sake. Let's do private function. This will be add task result dot failure dot invalid input dot to view state. And this needs like the current task input object as well. But this will return an add task view state. So let's return add task view state that active. Our task input will be whatever we give it, but the description input error message will be we need to set the error message conditionally based on whether or not we actually have an empty input. So I want to see what we did here. Okay, I like this. I forgot how we did this in the past. So the way this one works is we create what the error message would be, and then we use Kotlin's take if function, which takes some conditional. And basically what this will say is if this is true, use this thing. If this is false, then um, change the error message. So we're gonna do the same thing here. We'll do UI text happy Wednesday learning to code. Dot resource text r dot string dot um what's the word? And the task description dot take if this dot empty description. And then we do the same thing with the other one. Scheduled date input error message will be UI text dot resource text r dot string dot error invalid scheduled date take if this dot scheduled date and past. Okay, so that's how we convert this specific error result. Does Kotlin have a controller advice thing type thing like Java does? I'm not sure what that is. I've never used that, so I don't know if there's a comparison. Um, but so this is how we take our specific invalid input result and convert it to the UI configuration. So now that we have that, we can just call that here. We can do result.toViewState. And then task input is actually, I need to get from the current view state. So it can throw errors, a controller advice annotated classes catches all of it. You still be throwing validation errors on the input then. Interesting. So let me step back and show you where the validation's happening, because I don't think that's been explained very well in a while. So what I'm doing here, what this code does, this line basically says, I know that input was already invalid. At the point that the code we're looking at is concerned, we already know that the input is invalid. So what we're doing here is, how do I take that information and configure it into my add task view state that has an appropriate error message with it? So we're not checking for description to be empty and all that. Like, we've kind of already done that. This is just taking that information and mapping it into what is like a view state that is going to get rendered. The actual logic is going to happen eventually inside this uh, add task use case here, but we haven't gotten that far because that's like another layer up in our code base. Um, right, exactly. So what we were just doing is writing tests to make sure that our view can render that appropriately. And I think after having done what we just did, the answer to that should be yes. So we're going to run this test and we're going to see if it passes. We also need to then take this identical test and make a invalid date version of it, which is what we are going to do next if this passes. I should have done the invalid date first, but one step at a time. Thanks. This did pass. I'm not sure why this test isn't stopping right away. Um, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here. That's possible. Or maybe that's just Android Studio. But yeah, okay, it's just Android Studio. So what I'm going to do for this test, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Because it's going to follow the same format as the last one, but we're going to tweak our inputs a little bit. So here, we're going to say, do something. I don't know, we'll put in a real description. But our scheduled date, we're going to put as, I don't know, we'll just like take one day away. So this will be yesterday. Um, it's actually really interesting because we're using a fake and we're not talking to the real use case, then the input itself doesn't really matter, right? Like, it's because if I'm just calling a mock use case, then I'm not actually doing any input validation here. So this test is overkill in practice. Um, but I guess it's good to have. We could maybe change it to be like a full end-to-end integration test that talks to our actual use case implementation. Um, later on. That's something we could do, but let's let's just roll with this for now as if it did make sense, and then we can worry about changing it later. Here. And I might change this to a scheduled date and past, which is more specific about why it's invalid. And let's run those tests again. And this time we should have still have two tests that pass. And then if this looks good, we can do a similar thing for our input validation. Um, Here's hoping. Is something called when you click submit? Yes. So, um, oops, Android Studio is lagging on me. So in the view model, um, we have, whoops, that's the wrong view model. In this view model, there is a function here called on submit button clicked. And so this corresponds to the UI here. When I click this button, um, that is what triggers this method. So then given that input, we create a task, and then we have a use case class that gets called um, with the task to create. And then based on that result, we get a new view state that then needs to be rendered. I hope that made sense, Dota. Oh, but nice, our test passed. So let's go ahead and commit those, and we'll say adding tests for view level. Um, and now we can modify our use case to actually do some input validation. Yeah, the view state is a property on our view model itself. So I'm just trying to think out loud here about what I said around this fake add task use case and whether or not, um, yes, the use case is injected into the view models constructor. So I could share actually, I don't mind running through it if you want to know, but I can actually show you this file that runs over the architecture of this application a little bit. That might be helpful. Um, how hard is it to build the class manually? The add task use case, it's not that complicated. So in this moment, it's an interface. The use case is just an interface that has one method which takes some input and returns a result. And what this does in practice is this just has a reference to a repository where it will store the data in the repository. And then actually it should also do input validation, which is what we're going to do here um, in a moment. But I'm thinking about a way I might want to test this. And um, I have an idea in my head that I don't know if this is the best, but I kind of like it to make this like a little more, I don't know. Let's not go with the end-to-end integration test. Let's keep it simple. What we're gonna do is we're gonna write a unit test for this function itself. So we're going to do something very similar to what we just did. Um, Actually almost identical, but a layer up in that we're going to write some tests for our use case where we expect a certain result based on that input. So like here's what I mean. One thing we're gonna have in here is we're going to have like our fake repository, to be a fake task list repository. And then let's write a test that is Well, then I guess we could actually say it's gonna be the same for every test. Our use case will be add task use case. Um, add prod add task use case. Repository will be fake repository dot. Let's call this fake task list repository. So let's write a function here. Submit with empty description. So what are we going to have here? Well, we're going to have our task to submit, which will be a task. Same thing as before. Description will be empty. Scheduled date will be today. Our expected result will be add task result dot failure dot invalid input, and we'll say empty description is true. Um, schedule date and past false. So here we'll get actual result will be use case dot invoke path to submit, and then we can say assert that actual result is equal to expected result. That's what this test is going to look like. This is a suspending function, so we're going to throw this in a run blocking test and go from there. And we're basically going to do the same thing for the invalid date, uh, but just slightly different. So some description. Again, for the local date, we'll just do 1 day in the past. So this should be false. This should be true, is what we would expect. So if I run this as it is, this should also fail because our use case is not currently doing any input validation. But once I know these fail, we will change that and we'll actually do some validation, and that will be cool. Nice. So, okay. So let's do that. So the way I think I would do this is for what it's worth, the views in the application I'm looking at just displays data through the controller on the page. Yeah, so that's kind of how this works. Let me take another step back at the architecture. Maybe it'll help you. Yeah, I think that it's very close to what you're describing is how we do it. So we have a screen, which so we use Jetpack Compose in this project. If you're unfamiliar with that, think of this. The closest analogy would be like an activity or a fragment. And basically all this does is it observes the view state from our view model, and then it knows how to render it. See, this is just display this content with this view state. And then the UI events, they call methods on our view model. So this is the view itself. This is all it does. It takes in a view state and knows how to render it. And then based on events, it passes those off to the view model and says, do with this what you will. The view model, which is the class we've been looking at a little bit, then talks to, oh, it's statically built. Interesting. I'd be curious how you do that. I'm not really familiar with something like that. Um, hmm, interesting. Yeah, you can let me know if you have another example. I'm also happy to. Gotcha. Okay, it's closed source. Um, interesting. But I'm happy to walk through this architecture more if it helps answer some questions. Um, but but do check out the architecture doc in the that I linked as well. Maybe that kind of explains all the different components. Yeah, so this is what our view layer does. It takes in a view state and it just renders it. And then any UI events get passed off to the view model. The view model is like a state management container that it should only be responsible for the UI configuration logic. So, like this says, okay, when a new description comes in, do you have a service layer? Yeah, so that would be like one step up from, or a couple steps up from this. So the first thing is, so this class that we're looking at just does UI configuration. It changes that view state. You know, what is our current text input? Should I show a progress bar? Um, do I need to show an error message? That logic is going to happen kind of in this class. And then when functionality needs to happen, that calls something called a use case. And so what our use case is going to do is it will do some logic like input validation. That's what's going to come here in a second. And then it will talk to the data layer. The repository in our sample app is just a local SQLite database. But imagine this call would be like inside the repository. That's where you would have like a network call or a database call, stuff like that. That's going to live inside the repository layer. Uh, that's how all these little pieces are connected. So there's a lot of them, but it really helps abide by that kind of like single responsibility principle and that everything has very detailed scope. Um, yeah, domain layers can be confusing. Yeah, it adds a lot. But I've learned to like it after some time. That I like having the very specific responsibilities from each class. Is something I really enjoy. Um, but let's do this input validation real quick. So what I would probably do, I'm gonna look at the how do we do this for login? Um, yeah, that what you described overall is sounds very similar to how ours works, but I think the difference is maybe the number of classes that you look at. Um, yeah, like it sounds like this a similar idea, but it might just be split up into different classes. They might be called different things. But what you're describing sounds very similar to um, what I do. So this is what we did in the login screen last time we did input validation. Is we said given some input, return a result, but this is nullable. That's what this little question mark here is. So we basically say like if the input's invalid, we'll return accordingly. Otherwise, we return null. And then inside our main invoke function, we get that and we say, okay, if we have a validation result, return it. Otherwise, keep going. So I'm going to do the same thing here. We're going to say validate input, uh, which will take in that task, and um, result dot failure dot invalid input. Let's be nullable here. Yeah, this is domain logic. Yep. So empty description will be task dot description dot is empty. Uh, invalid date will be task dot scheduled date. I guess we could say less than local. I think you can do comparisons with local date. Can you do something fancy like, oh, you can do is before. So I can do is before local date dot now. That's really cool. Um, and so, okay, so we'll say return if empty description or invalid date, uh, add task result dot failure dot invalid input, um, empty description equals empty description, uh, schedule date and past. I guess let's rename this property. Scheduled date and past. Whoops. Scheduled date and past. Else. No. So we're going to say validation result equals validate input task. Um, if validation result is not equal to null, return validation result. Is this a side project or actual work? This is a side project. So I stream every Wednesday night here on Twitch, um, building this application, and then all of the streams are recorded and posted up on YouTube. So the idea was for a task management app that I wanted to build for myself as a side project, and then I just thought that would be a great project to build out in the open. Gives me a chance each day to or each week to learn something new and share it with people. Um, yeah. For work full time, I work for a digital pharmacy, basically, called Capsule Pharmacy. Uh, yeah, that's our input validation. Let's run our tests. I think they should pass now. Um, and then if they do, we can move into the uh, UI layer as well. Nice. Looks like they both passed. So let's run the app again. Um, oh no, why did I lose? I apparently lost connection to my physical device, so we're starting an emulator. That's fun. A rich text editor. That's pretty cool. This is another project. You can ignore this. Something I might do on stream one day as a side thing. I really want to build a bracket, like for esports, but think like a sports bracket, like appropriately, like March Madness coming up. I want to build like a bracket project that would show like teams that had gone against each other with a line going from like the semifinals to the finals and stuff. It's something I want to build, but I've had a lot of trouble getting to work. So it would be cool to build something like that. A news app from RSS feeds. That sounds fun. The first app I built while I was streaming was something like that. So we already have actually with these navigation bar screens. I have this little bug where the floating action button stays way too low, but ignoring that, um, let's see. So if I were to click submit on this, um, oh wait, why did that work? Oh, because it hasn't actually built the new version. I expected that to not really show any errors, but it was at least going to like block the inputs. Um, that's fine. So let's throw some test commits in here. So testing use case for input validation. And then let's start to talk about how we would um, handle the UI for this. So I mentioned that for the text input, um, yeah, I really wonder why my physical device got disconnected because that's so much nicer to work with. Um, I have no idea. Let's just toggle wireless debugging. Maybe that'll come back. Um, the stream still looks good, right? My internet's not laggy. Feel like I would start seeing something in chat if it wasn't working. Okay, cool. Um, I might just have to reconnect wireless debugging. Let's do that real quick. Um, huh. It just doesn't want to connect, I guess. All right, emulator it is. Um, that's fine. So is this running the latest? Let's double check that our emulator has the latest code real quick. And we'll close visor if it's not working, I guess. So on the ad test screen, if I hit submit, okay. So it's failing in the background because I can see we're obviously not going anywhere, but no error messages are showing up. So um, let's talk about how we do that. I mentioned that for the text field, it was supported already. Um, let me show you where we can find all that. If we go into the add task content composable, um, we have our inputs here, task description input. So this is a TOA text field. This is a custom text field that our app has made. Hey, this should be a string resource. Let's do that. Um, task input placeholder. Oh my god, I have a lot of string resources to clean up. We'll do that later. But here we can pass in an error message, which we need to do. We need to pass that in here, the UI text, which can be, actually, let's just do string here, error message. And so task description input can consume an error message. And here we'll pass it in. So error message will be view state dot task in. No. Ooh, interesting. So this assumes that we're active. So I need a cast here. Um, dot active dot description input error message dot get string. There's a lot going on here. Let's do it this way. Hopefully that's readable. So we have to do a cast to see if we're in the active view state. And then based on that, we get the description error message, and then we call get string, which basically does the check. Like if we're a string text, just return the value. If this is a string resource, then we actually get the string from our context, just to fill y'all in on what that's doing. So let's run this, and we should have a portion of the error message figured out. And then based on that, we'll have to take um, the actual function to add a task is in the domain. Yes, kind of. I'm not sure I understand the question. Oh yeah, that would be a great question. The directory structure. I'll show you that. Aha. So now we can see this is the error state when I submit. Yeah, let's do that real quick. Showing error message when submitting empty description. I can see it just occurred to me why you would have confusion. Um, so I don't really split up the app overall by domain, UI, whatever. Our app is actually the directory structure is by feature. So let's go all the way up to the top here. So there is a core directory because there are some things that are shared. And what you're going to see in core will be like um, core data classes, dependency injection, core UI components. Other than that, everything is by feature. So add task is a feature, login is a feature, task list is a feature. And then within that, we have split between domain and UI. So, and then domain actually has like any model classes, any relevant repositories to that feature, and any use cases for that feature. And then UI is going to have the UI components and view models for that feature. So that's how we have it split up. So I see why that was confusing because for me, add task is the feature and it has the UI code associated with adding a task and the domain code associated with adding a task. But those two packages are all inside the add task functionality. That's kind of how this app has it designed. So maybe that opens it up. Right. So the domain would have well, in this case, it lives in a different file. But yes, um, I call them repositories instead of services, but it's the same idea. It's a class for fetching and receiving data. Um, we've had this debate before that I should probably call it a service because a repository is like an aggregation of. Some people say a repository is like an actual like collection of services, but right, yeah. So I call it a repository in this project, but it's what other some apps would call a service. It's a very similar idea. Cool. I hope that clears up a lot of questions. No, we don't have feature modules. It's something I might look at in the future. Um, but right now we just have a single app module. Some of the view logic I wanted to it should be in the service layer in the domain. Um, I've seen different approaches to that. So you think where I handled instead of the validation being inside the domain layer, it should be like inside the service? I think we could do that. Um, but I guess one nice thing is it's kind of like if my service was right, I think it depends on what's being validated. I think if I'm validating user input, it makes sense to try to do that in the domain layer where it's like client side because then I'm not risking like making a network call for data that I know is going to fail, right? Um, that's one way I would look at it. Because another approach that some apps would take is I could just disable this button until I have input, which would be like a UI logic sort of thing, but I'd rather like just submit and then change that. It definitely could be, there's no right answer. Maybe someone thinks there's a right answer, but I feel like where you do it is kind of opinionated. Um, in practice, you would want both, yes. But this being a side project that's not talking to any real backend, um, I don't worry about it. But if I was building like a server side for this, then yeah, on the server side, I should also probably do some validation. Um, if you were thinking about the project holistically, that's definitely valid. So let's move on to taking this idea, this error message here. Um, yeah, taking this error message here and doing the same thing on our um, date picker. So what I'm gonna do is I want to look at our TOA text field real quick. Um, because this has a custom error message ourself. So I'm going to copy this code. And really all that's special is like it sets the color. Um, but we're just going to copy this and we're going to do the same thing inside the TOA date picker. Um, let's close the emulator for a moment and talk about this. So we have a box that is what configures like the date range and stuff. We're gonna put the error message right below it. This should go in like, is this? Yeah, this can go in like a column. And what we're going to need to change is this also needs to consume a possible error message, which will be a string, and we'll make this nullable. Now, I think we have compose previews for this. We do. So let's add a new preview for an error message with error. And then here we'll say error message um, begin past. I'll just typing in whatever for the preview. So let's build and run this and see what this looks like. But this is going to get a little more complicated because in our case, not only do we want to show a new text when there's an error message, but oh, and let's even do this. Let's do this here because that'll look nice for the preview. But we'll also want to configure the border color based on whether or not we have an error. Ooh, this is interesting. Um, I think what I would change here is let's go back to this. So this is fine, but let's um oh, I see. Hold on. I want my modifier that's being passed into my composable to go to the column now. That's why my padding was all messed up. Hey, Illustrator, thanks for stopping by. How are you doing tonight? Let's try this out. Let's see how this looks. Okay, this looks pretty good. Um, this looks very similar to uh, the text field did. But we also, so like I explained, we also want to change the border color. So how can we do that? Well, um, we already pass in the border color ourselves. So let's do this. We'll say if has error means error message is not equal to null. In out domain. Yeah, I've seen that approach as well to project structure. And it's something I've used in the past. But for this public app is where I switched to feature based, which is kind of nice. It means duplicating a lot of stuff. Like if every package has a UI and a domain subdirectory, then that feels very repetitive. But it is nice to just like look at the top and be like, ah, here are all of the features that can be done. Because, like, to your point, what happens is you end up with one package that's just really large because every feature uses something in that package. Versus by feature based, they stay a lot smaller. Um, and I find that you tend to navigate a project by feature. Like, if I'm in the add task screen, it makes sense that I also want the add task view model and the view state and its data layer. And like, why shouldn't that be in the same package? If I'm in a view model and then I want to go to a service layer, why does that have to be in an entirely different package on the other side of the project? That's a debate. Uh, oh, this is a good question. What would be preferred naming conventions for interface and its implementation? Can the implementation be called service? I think it depends on what your interface is. Um, and that's my answer. Because I think it is very much dependent on what the interface is. Um, yeah, I don't know. Can you give an example? Like, what does your interface do? Or if you can share, what is the name of the interface? And I can give you what I would do, but um, it's very much a personal preference here. Um, but yeah, like that's what I think. Like I think you could do that, but I think it just depends on like some people use service or manager or controller to mean similar things for like a concrete implementation. Um, it just depends on what the interface is. But anyway, so we want border color to use. So we'll say if has error, we're going to use material theme dot color scheme dot error, or we'll use border color. And then the same thing will be icon color to use. This will be if has error, Material theme, dot color scheme, dot error. There's no commas here. Else, icon color. Um, Text color will keep the same. I think that makes sense. So here we're going to do border color to use. And for icon color, we're going to do icon color to use. Uh, I found another hard-coded string, so I'm going to pull these out when I see them. Okay, so let's do a build and refresh, and let's see what the error state looks like for this. It's gonna look good, isn't it? I believe. I'm ready. Ooh, that does look good. The other thing, Dota, is like, I don't know how many different projects, especially different large projects you've worked on, is like every developer does things a little differently. Um, and so their project structure is going to be the same. And that's why, like, the conversations we had, but the way you described your code base to me, is it's like the overall theme is actually quite similar, but semantics are hard to be the same between two different developers. Package structure is going to be different. Uh, no, it's not, well, and that's when you talk about more experienced, that word can sometimes be used to describe it like a negative way, like that it's a negative thing that you don't have the same experience I do, and that's not what's happening here by any stretch. What's happening is just like I've, by nature of doing it longer, I've looked at more projects, and so I've seen so many different ways of doing it at this point, which is something you will get to. And that's why I appreciate you being here. You get to learn my perspective on doing these things, which could be very different from the team you've worked with. It could be very different from a lot of the people who watch this, and that's fine. It's nice to see different ways to do things. As I've sort of worked in like three different apps, I always go through this process of, okay, I really liked this from my last company, so I'm bringing it to my new job. And then there's also, I hated that my last job did this, so I'm never writing code this way again. Like, you learn both of those as you move forward. So yeah, I'm glad. I hope that I was able to answer some of those questions. But keep letting me know as you have them for sure. So this looks good. Let's run this. Oh, we can't run it just yet because we also need to actually pass that error message through. So here, for task state input, we'll pass in an error message, um, which will come in. So error message. We also need to handle the enabled state for our task date input. But are you sometimes like, I prefer it this way, but the current way doesn't bother me enough? Um, That's kind of how I describe uh like MVI and Redux actually. I think that from a purely principled standpoint, the finite state management you get with an approach like MVI um is incredible, and it's like just makes things so much safer. But uh I feel like it's over engineering, and I don't think that like MVVM, the way that I use MVVM, is so unsafe that I can't use it. So like that's one idea, but there are probably others. Yeah, like it's hard to think of one off the top of my head, but uh hold on. I found another string resource. So we got a hard-coded string. So there was a question. I noticed to UI string method. What is that? I don't remember. Where is that at? Oh, inside the date picker. Aha! So this is just a hard-coded, well, hard-coded. This just takes a local date and converts it into the user-friendly month, day, year format. Um, that's what that is doing. So I just threw it in a private extension function to pull that datetime formatter like outside of the composable. One could argue it's not supposed to go here, but I think because it's just for my own composable, that's what I would do. Okay, and then we also need to pass that error message here. So what we're going to do is error message. We do view state as add task view state dot active dot scheduled date input error message um, dot get string. Okay, so now let's run this, and we should see um, what we want to see here. We use getters and setters directly in certain spots, like on what? That can be a controversial topic. Immutability is really important. That you usually shouldn't be calling setters. You should be using like a copy method, which exists in Kotlin, but not in Java. So in Java, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But um, I think that like it could make sense sometimes. Okay, so here's our add task screen. We submit. Interesting. Oh, this didn't fail because this date is fine. It's today. Let's select the date in the past. Nice. So that changes. Getters in the view, no setters. That makes sense. Um, cool. So this looks good. One thing I noticed is that when I changed the date, um, it cleared both of my error messages, which I guess is not the worst, but I would have liked to keep what was already there. Um, so one way we could do that is, well, let's commit this. Showing error message for invalid date. And I want to get a screenshot of that actually because I'll probably share that out. I think that's a cool thing that we did. Um, that saves on my desktop. Nice. Now you're learning that you don't want to have view state as sealed class ever again. You know, you're not wrong, but that first day that we decided to do this was it was a very heated conversation in chat for sure. Um, but it wouldn't be bad, right? Like, watch this. So we're gonna go to add task view model. And so, okay, on description changed. Um, we can basically say, we basically do the same thing here. Well, here, if I'm changing the description, we'll clear the error message. But for the scheduled date input error message, we'll do um, view state that value as view state add task view state active dot. I mean, it's the same. It's the same thing we just did in the other file. It's not the worst code I've ever written. Um, so whenever these inputs change, we only clear the error message relevant to what's changing. It is definitely a gray area. Like, it provides some benefits and also provides some struggles. Data classes do the same thing. Um, and you know what, Absol, if you're still here, this is probably like how I feel about data classes versus sealed classes for view state. Like, I think if you asked me, I would probably say data classes. But when I did this and chat was like really wanted sealed classes, um, I was like, whatever, I don't care enough to fight it for data classes. but that's what I use at like the capsule project. That's what I use in a lot of my other projects, just because they're easier to work with. Even though sealed classes are like, they're nicer, you know? Um, no, in this project for view states, we have sealed classes, which are like super powerful enums. Okay, I still don't understand the difference between an interface and a sealed class, a sealed interface and a sealed class. And at this point, I'm like too afraid to ask. Like I just don't get it. I don't like it. They're the same. They are slightly different. Actually, who wrote? Was one of you in chat the one who wrote? Raphael, did you write the sealed interfaces for API errors blog post? Was that you? Someone in chat wrote a blog post about that that made me understand the benefit of sealed interfaces over sealed classes, um, because they showed a use case. Yes, that was great. If you can find it, drop the link in chat. You should definitely plug that right now. Um, yeah, Absol might be onto something that it's like sealed interfaces as long as they're in the same package, that's fine. But there was also a way that because it's an interface, you can have multiple things implement like multiple sealed interfaces where you can't inherit from multiple sealed classes because it's a class, not an interface. So like that was one of the talking points in there. Okay, and our error messaging looks good. If I start typing text, um, this one doesn't clear, so that's good. So only clearing relevant um, error message. Nice, great blog post, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. Cool. So that's the first part of this. Let's update our stream history file for today. I do want to clean this up uh, in the future, so we'll definitely do that. Let's do that. So this is got the 15th stream. Um, in this stream, we added input validation to the add task screen so that we can enter a task without a description or valid interface versus abstract class. I guess that's one way you could look at it, yeah. Um, okay, we also have some detect issues. Long method. Oh, interesting. So detect is yelling at me. My static analysis tool is yelling at me because this method is too long. So that's valid. How do we want to map string resources? Um, we have to think about breaking this class down a little bit. So, but I don't know how we can do that because it's all relevant to this function, but it is long. I wonder if I should just suppress it here. Um, I could try to pull some code out and put this in like a private composable and call it like error message. Um, we could also like pull this out into a private thing and be like, um, date and icon. Okay, that's one way to do it. That eliminates some lines of code. Uh, I'd rather not suppress things because I put that static analysis in here for a reason. So, and then actually now to just be even more clear, we're gonna pull this one out. This will be, oh, no, there's too many properties here. We'll just leave that as it is. Um, but we're gonna put arguments on separate lines. Okay, let's run detect and see if this passes without any issues. So we'll both give you type safety, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. That it's just the difference between a class and an interface. It's the same thing. With closed hierarchies. That makes sense. And cleaning up. Okay, so let's make this pull request, and then if y'all still want to keep going, the other thing I wanted to work on today was an empty state. So, oops, let's push this. So if I were to clear app data, um, and I run this again, so on our app, if you run this with no tasks, um, you just see an empty screen. So it would be cool to just like deal with an empty state, put something here. So that was something I was thinking we could work on today. But let's make a pull request real quick. So task input validation um, fixes number 79 by checking for invalid descriptions and dates. This will be enhancement project. This goes with task management and create pull request. We could write some more tests actually. Um, if y'all are interested in writing some UI tests around this, that would be fun to figure out. The classes in Java, everything will work. Hmm. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that there was a comparison over in Java land. Um, just looking over this code to see if there's anything I would change, but no, I think we're good. Okay, so do we want to do an empty state or do we want to look at composed testing a little bit? Um, composed testing. All right, let's do it. So I'm going to put this on a new branch as well. Um, but um, just to be clear. So testing this might be kind of tricky because actually, how do we want to do this? Um, okay, this is something I have always wanted to figure out. Um, so I'm gonna see if we can. So we have this add task content, right, which pulls stuff out. It basically says like, okay, give me this view state, um, and then it has these callbacks for when information changes. So it allows me to test specifically like the content of the screen. That when I do something, I get a callback. I've always been curious about how I could go a step up and actually do like a fuller compose integration test here. But like if I go to my add task screen, then like this is a little tricky because like it references like the hilt view model and stuff like that. Um, and I just wondered if there was a way to still write unit tests for this screen. Isn't there a way to override like a module in hilt where I could make like a test? Actually, might not even need to. I'm probably overthinking this. That I could probably just build it. This screen is the one you're looking at. Um, that's what's on this screen. So I'm actually really curious what would happen if I just tried to build this. So let's do that. Let's um oh, this behavior? Sure. So this first line is we're observing the view state. Collect as state is basically this uses a Kotlin state flow, which is an observable type. If you've used RxJava, it's kind of like a flowable sort of thing. But oh, what is happening? My phone is bugging out on me. Um, so that's what this does. This is observing the flow. And then this disposable effect is kind of like a side effect saying it observes every time the view state changes and is checking if the view state moves into the completed state. We call navigator.pop backstack, which is basically saying go back to the previous screen. So that's what happens when I click this button and everything is valid. We move into the completed screen and then everything goes back. Um, so that's what this does. And then this is what renders the UI. So it renders our view state, it takes in the methods, and then it has this modifier, which is like fill the screen. Uh, that's going to make it hard to test, yes, but it might just work out because I'm going to have this run on a physical device, is the plan. I want this to be like a real integration test. And I guess we could go a step further. And instead of, I wanted to see if I could isolate my test to this one specific screen. But why don't we go like, right, I'd have to end test it. Um, so I was trying to narrow it down to this screen, but what if we did like a full end-to-end test that says load up the app, click this button, enter information, and then verify that like it comes back and I see the previous screen. We could write that full integration test. Let's do that. Um, so one thing we'll need to start is I think we need to add a compose testing dependency. Why can't the end-to-end test be on just a single thing? Maybe I it's because I don't know if this will work or not. This let me show you. Let's start typing. I always overcomplicate it before I get too far, but let's try it out. So let's copy these dependencies real quick into our build.gradle file. Um, and there's a couple things here, so let's close that for a moment. So this first one is oops, let's move this down here just because I like having these. I like a little bit of consistency in my Gradle file. Uh, nice. So those are all composed version. So this first dependency is for the UI testing frameworks. This second one is a way to create a test activity um, just for uh, where I can basically like upload a individual composable. Do I need anything else? Maybe not. Maybe that's it. Um, let's find out. Let's run this. So what we want to do is we want to test this screen, right? So we'll do Control Shift T. Um, Yeah, you're right. Because I was thinking in my head, I wanted to test what we did today. I want to test that when I click the button, I see an error message. Now, technically, we've tested that. We tested the view model. What we didn't test was when I run this and when I physically click the button, can I see the error message? I don't have any way to verify that the error message is being rendered. And that's what I was thinking about testing. And I guess the way we could do that is to not think about the screen, but to think about this. If I call add task content with an error message, is it rendered? And that I know how to test, so that we're going to do. That we're going to do. Let me show you how we're going to do that. We are going to create a new test called add task content test. And you're right, test the contents. That's what we're going to do. And this is going to go in the Android test folder. So we need our JUnit rule here. Compose test rule will be, whoops, trust. Create compose rule. So this won't, this has to be public. So this won't handle like when I click the button, like the end-to-end test. It'll just be, given this view state, can you render properly? That's what I should have done in the first place. So let's do it. So we're going to say render invalid data states or invalid input messages. That's what we'll do. So here we'll say our view state will be add task view state dot active. Our task input be task input description will just be an empty string. Um, Actually, can I just wait? Do I have default values? I think I do, so I can just do this. Um, yeah, I don't do the given when then in the test name, but I've seen people do that. I agree as well, Raphael. Like, I definitely prioritize the JVM tests, but I think it's fun to learn these, and I think they do carry some value. Anything that you can automate is great, right? And I think for the TOA project, this is our first compose test in 15 streams. I have waited this long to try writing UI tests, which is really impressive. So, okay. Um, but we'll put description, input error message. So we'll say description error. So it's a test. So I don't need this to be like super user friendly. Um, I could just do um, scheduled date error. And actually, let me make those private variables, and I'll show you why, or local variables, and I'll show you why in a second. Um, just be description error, and then whoops, I keep trying to type private. So this is just so I can like reuse it later in the test without worrying about typos. So now that we have our view state, what we need to do is render this. So yeah, I've seen that approach as well, and I'm probably not as um strict about the given when then. Like it's there in the flow, but I don't like put comments or anything to go with it typically. So we'll do compose test rule dot set content. And here we're going to do add task content. View state will be view state. Um, and then for all of these, we could just ignore them for now because what this test is doing is it's just testing that I can render the content appropriately. So then we'll just do compose test rule dot on node with text, um, description error, and then we say assert is displayed. And we'll do the same thing with unknown with text with the scheduled date error assert is displayed. So here's the other thing, just uh, Raphael, why I like writing these tests now is because that took like 5 minutes. In the old view framework, getting like espresso set up and figuring out how the heck to verify text was displayed on the screen with espresso, it's also because like you had to initialize the fragment, and then you actually did have to like figure out how to pass the view state into a fragment. It was complicated. With Compose, it becomes so much easier to render our UI tests. And I think that like we've been tricked, like we've been taught like UI tests are so complex and they're not worth our time. But with Compose, this is so much easier. Compose is a declarative UI framework in Kotlin. So no, it's instead of writing our views using XML, we write them all in Kotlin. So like all of this is what renders this screen. Everything is in Kotlin. Um, it's a new UI framework. It just came out like middle of last year. Um, it's a really great tool. Okay, so let's run this. Let's see if this passes. And we should see the test run on the right, um, which would be cool. While that we're waiting on that, let me go check on our pull request. It's very nice. A lot of people really like it. I like it a lot. Okay, we've got some dependency updates, but that's fine. Um, we're gonna write fixes number 79. Cool. So, and then I already have GitHub Actions set up to, yeah, I have the update warnings in the pull request messages. So, um, I have learned the hard way. I never update these on stream, because the amount of times that I've like broken a build by updating to an invalid version and then wasted 20 minutes while you all watch me scramble to get my project to compile, I just don't do it anymore. So I usually update these in secret, like on the off days that I'm not streaming. Um, Same with updating Android Studio. Aha! But the test passed. Let's run it again just so you all can see it run on the emulator in case you missed it. Um, so see, it's actually, it didn't look good because in the tests I'm not running it with like my app's theme, but I can see the red and I can verify that these are rendered. So we can put that as successful. So rendering error messages if supplied. And we could test more of the screen, but you know what? I think that is good enough for now. So let's push that and let's make a pull request for that as well. Okay. UI tests for error messages. Um, if we supply the add test view state that active, say with error messages, ensuring those are rendered in the add test content. Um, relates to number 79. Labels. Did I ever put a testing label? I didn't, so we're gonna make one. What's a good color for testing? Blue. Arbitrary. I'm going with blue. Projects, task management, and create pull request. Oh, green makes a lot more sense. Can I edit labels? I can. Green makes a lot more sense because we want our tests to be in the green, right? And then yeah, so this has three things that run on every pull request. Android build will do our unit tests and our lint checks for us. Android UI tests run an emulator and actually fire off the connected tests. And then Danger is what does the version updates checks and leaving a comment. So we could follow this one along, but um, let me show you the workflow real quick. Android UI tests. So this uses a GitHub Actions runner for an emulator. I have it run API level 29, but then we just say run app connected check, and it runs all of those tests. And like I said, this is actually the first one we've written. Otherwise, it's this example test, which we could probably remove now. Um, and yeah, as we add more, um, we'll xmaple example. As we add more, we can have confidence that they're run with every pull request. I'm also going to need to update the stream history. I have this. So this is a cool thing, Dota. If this is your first time watching the stream, let me show you this. Um, in the GitHub repo, exclamation point GitHub, by the way, I'm just going to do that for you now, in case you want to star and follow this. I have a stream history file. Now, at the top, there's hyperlinks to each stream. I do want to reorganize this to put like a list of topics, because now that I have so many streams, this just looks really daunting. So I'd rather put like the topics at the top so people can be like, ah, I want to go find the streams where we worked on architecture, or I want to find the streams where we worked on testing, and make that easier. But this will link to all of the streams as well as like their YouTube links, their PRs, their notes. But the reason I brought this up is if you think the continuous integration is neat, I have a pull request check that says every single pull request I make must modify this file. And that's because projects I streamed in the past, I wasn't good at keeping the resources up to date. So this forces me every time to make a pull request, I have to make sure the resources are up to date. Um, so, which I usually do on stream by pointing out what those notes are, and then after the stream, because I don't know what the GitHub PR link is until I make it. So I go back later and I add YouTube and I add the pull request links. But this at least makes me organize it so that later I'm just going back and adding hyperlinks. Um, but it's been super helpful. So actually, I think that runs pretty fast. So if I look at this now, um, oh, so because I didn't like rebase with the old branch, it didn't yell at me for not changing it, but usually it would. But that's because I like branched off of a branch where this technically has changed. But see, and now I have conflicts. Let's resolve our conflicts. Uh, which normally I do from Android Studio, but for this quick markdown file, I just use the GitHub UI to do this. Okay. And then while that runs, if we're still going strong, do we want to look at building some sort of empty state? Um, do mob on some. What do you mean by that? I'm not familiar with those words. Like, oh, like paired program with other people? Um, kind of. Like, I have considered doing, like having like a guest on the stream and working with someone else, but the reason I haven't is mostly just from um, like logistics and technical standpoint. Like I'd have to update my stream overlay, figure out how to include someone else's video, and it's a whole thing. Um, oh, with like more than three. I mean, I feel like I technically do it every Wednesday, because there's more than three of you in the chat, and depending on what I'm working on, it gets heated, and we have like 5 to 10 people suggesting a naming or an architecture convention. So sometimes chat can get pretty wild, which I like, but at like any given moment, no, I haven't really done something like that before. Sounds chaotic. Um, okay, let's do clear app data again. So let's. Do I want to build an empty state? It was. Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah. We've never seen chat get crazy here. Um, yeah, if we go back to which one was it? I'll know as soon as I look at stream history. Hold on. Like, there's a reason the login implement. Let me point this out in case this isn't clear. There is a reason login implementation took 2 weeks. It's a login screen with two fields. You would think that that would be like an hour's worth of work, but yet login also had 4 YouTube videos because chat we had to fight tooth and nail and everything. However, I'm very happy with the decisions we've made, and it made work like we did today a lot easier because we've set the groundwork for consistency. But yeah, we took um there were lots it was a long stream. I think this might have been the day that I streamed for like 5 hours. Was that the night? Um Mob time. Huh. This is really cool. Um I'll have to check this out. Uh Yeah, maybe that was the one stream. I don't normally I stream for like 2 hours, maybe three, but one day we did 5.5 hours. And I think it was that day. Um, or was it this one? No, it wasn't that one. Yeah, I think it was the login day. Works same as in a car. Driver types, navigator tells you what to type. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a good idea. Sounds like my Twitch chat. Um, 5 minute turns. That does sound really cool. Um, wondering if I want to keep going or not. What do you think, chat? What do y'all want to do tonight? If there's anything else we're going to end. Yeah, I might wrap up too. It's been a couple hours. We got a lot done. Um, figure out app actions. Okay, I'm not trying to turn this one into another 5 hour stream, but I should put that on my list. I'm gonna write that down. Actually, I need to start writing like a physical list of app ideas. Um, oh no, where's my stylus for this? Oh no, where is it? Awkward. I have to figure out where my remarkable stylus went. Um, But I should start managing like a physical list of stream ideas. That's definitely what I would like to do